Mars has always attracted those who are filled with a strong sense of adventure and exploration. The Red Planet has stirred the imagination of many great thinkers and writers, from Edgar Rice Burroughs, Ray Bradbury and H.G. Wells, to Kim Stanley Robinson and Arthur C. Clarke. In The Snows of Olympus, Arthur C. Clarke describes the procedures for the terraforming of Mars, the possibility of making it habitable to human beings. Over the last 20 years, a great deal has been learned about Mars. For much of that time, David Percy has been researching what he sees as a number of distinctive links between Mars and Earth. Percy, who by profession is an award-winning film and television producer, lectures widely and has appeared on numerous radio and TV programs.
Since the dawn of time, man has tried to unlock the secrets of the universe. Tonight, scientists are trying to unravel the mystery behind startling new photos.
As the European Director of Operations for the Mars mission, he created the graphic visualizations and produced the video of the Mars mission's findings. These were presented by Richard Hoagland at the United Nations headquarters in New York on the 27th of February 1992 under the title The Terrestrial Connection. David Percy is co-author of the work 2/3, which features, among many groundbreaking topics, an hypothesis of intelligent design and placement of a complex on our neighbour, the Red Planet. In September 1996, he was invited to the county of Yorkshire, England, to speak at the University of Bradford.
An increasing number of people are becoming aware of what has been described as the face on Mars. I'm going to show that there's a connection between this complex on Mars and Avebury, Glastonbury and Stonehenge in southern England on two scales of magnification. Now, with most planets, there's a little bit of physics here. We have to put in the physics just to give you the background, and it's only very short, so please do bear with us. With most planets, by virtue of their rotating, there is always a physical upwelling of energy that invariably occurs between 19 and 20 degrees latitude in the north or the south of the planet. This coincides with the latitude of an imaginary tetrahedron placed inside the planet. Now, we would call this tetrahedron a circumscribed tetrahedron. Now, just imagine a clear sphere with this pyramid sitting inside it, with the points of the tetrahedron just touching the sphere on the inside. One point of the pyramid would always be at the pole of the planet, as we can see here, and the other 3 points of the tetrahedron would always sit at a latitude of 19.47 degrees. Now, we find the same thing occurs in many of the planets in our solar system. Most notably, we find it in Jupiter with the great red spot, and with Neptune with the great dark spot. Now, the interesting thing about Neptune is that the great dark spot and planet Earth are approximately the same size. Gives you some scale of this, but the point is, it's at that latitude there is always a physical upwelling of energy. Now, in August 1975, NASA sent an imaging probe to Mars, and during July 1976, it started sending detailed pictures of the planet's surface back to Earth. We're now going to consider the region of the planet known to NASA as Cydonia. And here, the absolutely remarkable is found in great abundance. Notice its location in relation to the imaginary tetrahedron. It's positioned 120 degrees east of the energy upwelling on Mars, which is called Olympus Mons. It's in fact a third of the way around the planet from Olympus Mons. Now, Cydonia is a complex situated in the northern hemisphere of Mars at some 41 degrees latitude. It's at a higher latitude than 19.47, but it's located nevertheless in a trigonomic relationship to 19.47. We believe it could have been at 30, 60, or 40.8 degrees, to be precise. Now, I'd like to stress here that there's no way, in our view, that self-aware beings could have ever evolved on Mars because it spins too slowly. Mars never was, nor could it ever become, a blue-green planet. However, we believe that there were visitors to Mars. Most people think of Martians and assume that, if they're Martians, that they evolved on Mars like we did here. But we believe that the reason why life evolved on this planet is because we have a moon of the size that it is. And it rotates around the Earth and it causes precession, in fact retrograde precession. That's to say the Earth rotates in one direction and the wobble of the planet is in the opposite direction to its rotation. And we think that this is responsible for setting up such a tension in the planet, such a creative situation, that it has brought forth life. No other planets in our solar system have such an arrangement. Mars doesn't have it. It spins too slowly, it has no moon, and therefore has not brought forth life evolving to self-aware life. Now, this complex measures around 30 by 15 miles in extent and is approximately 450 square miles. And we've good reason, incidentally, for stating these distances in non-metric terms. Now, the photographs in question were first seen by only NASA personnel. Then, in the late summer of '76, a number of pictures were presented to a gathering of international journalists at a press conference. In fact, there were 1,000 of them. And on seeing the Cydonia pictures, several reporters put the question, "What's that face?" That face, they were told, was just a trick, just the way the light fell on it. A NASA spokesman, who was a project official, stated that the photograph taken a few hours later showed no trace of this face. Now, the presenters at the press conference were to a certain extent speaking off the cuff, so it would be unfair to expect absolute exactness. Nevertheless, a few hours later, the whole area was in complete darkness, and so therefore the camera had to be photographing further west. But on the other hand again, NASA had taken 2 sets of photographs of Cydonia, one at 10 degrees and one at 27 degrees sun elevation, and some 35 days apart. Both sets of images clearly show the face. There was no trick of the light. In our view, NASA was lying. It's not until 3 years later, in '79, that Vince DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, 2 professional computer image enhancers, were browsing through the picture library at the American National Space Science Data Center, and here they came upon not just the one set, but both sets of the Cydonia pictures. They were amazed. That was their own word. Now, this image is a composite of some of the NASA pictures that DiPietro and Molinar saw that day back in the '70s. But in this illustration, the images have been further computer enhanced by Dr. Mark Colotto in the United States, and they've received further enhancement and rectification in London recently. Now, the location of the face and other major components of the complex are clearly marked. And over to the right-hand side, you can see there is a crater, and there is an area around the crater which is called the ejector blanket. Now, we're going to look at the close-up of that in a moment, but I want to point out that an ejector blanket is the material that, if you will, is the splash, the remains of the impact that caused the crater in the first place. Now, this is a close-up of the crater, and it's adjacent to a wall which is about 2 miles long. To give you some reference, the face on Mars is about 1 mile long. So we have this very, very long, large structure built on top of the ejector blanket. That's to say the construction of this wall, as we call it, post-dates the ejector blanket. Now, if we look across at the crater, you'll see on the crater rim there is a tetrahedral pyramid right on the rim of the crater, and it's just north of a gap. It's very, very important to remember that. And also, if you can see it, in the center of the crater there are two white dots. And please bear that in mind, because we're going to be looking at an analogue of those a little bit later on. Now, to the south of the crater is a mound, which has an apparent anti-clockwise spiral ascending it. Now, the mound is about 1 mile in diameter and approximately 500 feet high. Now, here is an illustration of one of the most well-known of crop circles, or crop glyphs, as we prefer to call them, that have appeared in southern England in recent years. This glyph was activated at Avebury Castle on the 17th of July 1991. It's a tetrahedron, as you'll notice if you look at it carefully, and I want in this case to draw your attention to the part of the glyph that's on the right. That's the notch spiral on the right-hand side of the glyph. The glyph contains a wealth of information, but we're just going to look at one aspect of it. Now, this is a close-up of the equiangular logarithmic spiral of the crop glyph, the basis of the stepped or notch spiral of the glyph. And this was realized by Errol Torren, a geomorphologist who works for the American Defense Mapping Agency, and he produced this illustration that shows that the notch spiral is the basis of an equiangular logarithmic spiral. Subsequently, I realized that the mound on Mars is similarly spiraled, and this is the mound and the equiangular logarithmic spiral combined. So now, due west of this mound is a cluster of what seem to be mainly pyramidal structures, one of which has obviously been damaged. This group is referred to as the city, which we'll discuss in more detail later. And located to the south is a large five-sided pyramid. It's called the D&M pyramid after its discoverers, Dipitrio and Molinar. Now, to the left-hand side of this five-sided pyramid, it looks to us intact, and the right-hand part of it appears to be damaged. Please bear that in mind, because that will be relevant later. And this overlay emphasizes the straight sides of the pyramid. Now, as Errol Torren has stressed, an object with five sides cannot be formed, or at any rate cannot be maintained, by the action of wind and weather. For the force that is sharpening one face will at the same time be causing any existing opposite faces or sides to erode. Seems quite reasonable. And therefore we would conclude that the five-sided pyramid on Mars is not natural. Now, the same applies to the face itself. Fractal analysis, as used in the Gulf War, has been deployed here in this, and you can see on the right-hand side the fractal analysis and the original image on the left-hand side of the picture. Now, they used this fractal analysis to spot tanks in the Gulf War, and they've deduced, after doing this exercise with this material on the Cydonia complex, that the face on Mars is the most unnatural object in a region of over 4,000 square miles. We're now going to move back to Earth and to a crop glyph that appeared at the foot of Silbury Hill in Wiltshire, England, on the 27th of July, 1991. Now, this crop glyph prompted me to pull out a book from a rather extensive library that we have. It was called Prehistoric Avebury by Aubrey Burl. And it fell open at a page which in fact was a double-page spread. It was a photograph. And it was a photograph of the Avebury complex. And this is the photo. This is the black and white photo taken by West Air Photography quite a few years ago. And it's an image taken looking south. It's the opposite direction to the way we've been looking at these pictures so far. The Cydonia complex, we've had north, basically, to the top of the picture. Now here, we're looking in the opposite direction. This picture was exceedingly useful for this notion that I had, because Silbury Hill is in the picture as well. So you can see Silbury Hill in the top right-hand side of the picture, and in the foreground is the Avebury earthen rampart and ditch. And then I guess what I had was a form of far memory. There's no other way of describing this. I thought to myself, this is the image you would see if you were coming in to land on this complex on Mars. If you were coming in from the north and you were looking out of the window of your craft, you would see beneath you the crater that we've been talking about, responsible for that ejector blanket. And in the distance, you would see the spiral mound. Then I realized that this Avebury earthen rampart and ditch could be a representation of this crater, and that Silbury Hill in the distance could be a representation of that spiral mound on Mars. So, working with a large ordnance survey map, carefully and with a measure of confident excitement, I overlaid this map on top of the complex and found them to be stunningly proportionate. Now, that's to say, when the Cydonia mound and crater complex is reduced by a ratio of 14 to 1, that's to say 14 miles in Cydonia equals 1 mile at Avebury, it fits exactly over Avebury-Silbury. Now, I realise that, together with the Silbury Crocglyph, all three representations were of one and the same thing, of the same geography and topography, that in short, all three were basically the same picture, conveying the same information in each case. So, triggered by that Crocglyph, I realised that Silbury Hill and Avebury Circle must be scale models of that part of the complex on Mars. Now, Avebury Circle, for its part, is the mightiest in size and grandeur of all stone circles. It's of a magnificent complexity, measuring 1/4 mile across. Now today, the village nestles comfortably within its circumference. And one writer comments that if Stonehenge is a church, then Avebury is a cathedral. Now, Avebury itself consists principally of an earthen rampart and inner ditch from which the earth for the rampart was dug. Circles of standing stones then formed 2 further inner rings. 4 million cubic feet of material was removed and excavated in order to create Avebury Circle, and it's believed to have been done by ancients up to 5,000 years ago. Now, this is a drawing of the 2 further inner stone circles. It illustrates an offset from north by 19.5 degrees. But now notice the centres of those 2 stone circles. Those 2 stone circles aren't there now, they're not intact, but these, of course, have been reconstructed by experts. Those 2 white marks I pointed out to you in the crater on Mars correspond to the 2 stones that form the centre of these circles at Avebury. We were now beginning to piece it all together. In order for people to have lived and worked on Mars, they had to do something with the environment. They had to have an atmosphere. They had to make the planet at least temporarily habitable. And we believe they put 2 enormous pieces of technology in that crater in the complex. And they were called spinning disks. You may hear a lot about spinning disks in the next few years. We understand that NASA may be doing experiments with spinning disks. Our book talks about spinning disks. We believe it's a technology that powers craft, but it's also a technology that can infuse a planet with gravitrons. And you can infuse the planet and increase the apparent mass of the planet and enable it to spin at the right rate and to maintain an atmosphere. And I think that these 2 circles at Avebury are memorializing the location of the spinning disks on Mars. Now, a quick look at the general view of this Cydonia complex again, to remind ourselves of the location of the crater and the spiral mound on the right-hand side of the complex. We're now going to compare the spiral mound on Mars with Silbury Hill in England. Now, Silbury Hill, we should stress, is not a burial mound, as we have been told. The entire purpose and significance, in fact, of the Avebury-Silbury complex remains at present a complete mystery. Silbury Hill would have required the movement of 9 million cubic feet of material. And again, experts have calculated that it would have taken 700 people 10 years to build it. What with, one might ask, and what for? And were there even 700 people living around this part of England at the time? It was an amazing feat. I think it's probably, and other people have suggested this, that equivalent to the effort of putting a man on the moon. It must have been very, very important to them. And of course, more recently, we have records of ancient Britons dancing up Silbury Hill in a spiral. Now, looking again at the Ordnance Survey map of the area, you can see we have an existing straight line on the map joining the western part of the image to the right-hand part, and it's a Roman road. And in fact, this Roman road avoids Silbury Hill. It bends, and otherwise it will continue right through to Silbury Hill. It bends to avoid it. And we can now ask ourselves, is there anything at Avebury approximating the wall in Cydonia? Well, we constructed a line from the centre of Silbury Hill to the centre of Avebury Manor. And this is Avebury Manor. Now, on constructing this line, we found that we had replicated the right angle. Actually, it's an 89-degree angle at the junction between the line that connects to the apex of the five-sided pyramid, which is to the left of the image as we've been looking at it, and the line that extends northwards to the centre of the wall. Now, we also constructed a line from the centre of the mound on Cydonia to the tetrahedral pyramid on the rim of the crater. Remember, we pointed out that there's this little tetrahedral pyramid on the rim, which is north of a gap on Cydonia. Now, the angle between the vertical wall line and this new line we had created, joining to the tetrahedral rim pyramid, is 19.47 degrees. Now we find ourselves, once more, fair and square in Wonderland. Not in the wonderland of Carroll's Alice, but in the land of genuine wonders. We'd already noticed a small mark on the Ordnance Survey map on the Avebury rampart, where the tetrahedral pyramid occurs on the rim of Cydonia. In other words, there's a mark that the Ordnance Surveyors have indicated that is exactly the same spot as this rim pyramid on Cydonia. Now, this mound was just above a gap in the Avebury rampart, just as the Mars pyramid is above a gap in the Cydonia rim. It's the exact mirror image of the Avebury situation. One's a mirror of the other. The gap at Avebury is caused by a road, or at least there's a road filling the gap. It's the only mound indicated on the Avebury rampart by the Ordnance Surveyors, and is clearly an analogue, in our view, of the tetrahedral pyramid on Mars. Now, this pyramid on the Avebury rampart, north of a gap, mirrored by a tetrahedral pyramid on the Cydonia rim, surely sets the final seal of proof. One would like to say the miraculous seal of proof on a case that we think was already proven without it. Now, we've surveyed the Avebury pyramid. In fact, we did this in December of 1991. David Myers and I undertook a physical survey. The tumulus is indeed tetrahedral in structure, not regular, with two long sides and one short, so that it projects almost lozenge shape in one direction. Now, these very same features also appear to be duplicated by the Cydonia rim pyramid. It's also similar in profile to Glastonbury Tor. Now, here is an illustration of the Silbury Hill crockcliff, and here again we find our angle of 19.47 degrees, as you can see. And here we can only add that further angles of 19.47 degrees can be readily generated from the glyphs and from the structures that we've been studying and decoding. The glyph, however, contains a wealth of other information, including, for instance, the mass ratios between Earth and Mars. But is there anything more specific at Avebury to indicate the wall? Well, first, please, in this very high resolution image, this is the highest resolution one can get in the Ordnance Survey maps, please note the position of the church. We noted at the very northern limits of where the ridge of the wall might have been that there was a linear depression in a paddock north of Avebury Manor. Well, directly in line with the hypothetical projection from Silbury Hill and in accordance with the scale of the overlay was a low, badly silted ditch and evidence that there had been a dirt wall. And we learned from a local archaeologist who's been with the National Trust for over 25 years that it was once the north-south road from the ancient village. They traced it down south as far as the present-day car park. Now, the remains of the ditch may have been an ancient road, as the archaeologists surmise, but it no doubt had another and perhaps more significant purpose as an analogue for the wall on Mars. Now we're going to move to the five-sided pyramid and its possible analogue. Now, the baseline of this triangle that we put over the Ordnance Survey map extended, if you remember, from the centre or the apex of the five-sided pyramid to Silbury Hill, and it was the Roman road. If we turn around and face in the opposite direction, we find that this line joining from Silbury Hill to the apex of the pyramid takes us up a long, gentle incline and brings us to a significant tumulus, an earthen mound surrounded by a copse of trees. It's the only break in the field for about a mile in any direction. It literally sticks out like a sore thumb, but it's a beautiful sight. On approach, we see something else, an upright stone stela protruding from the mound. And this is it here. We have David Myers and Tony Coulson in this picture. David Myers was the co-author of 2/3, and Tony Coulson is a dowser and a healer. He was dowsing on Earth for objects that are on Mars. He was remote dowsing, if you will. This is an air view of the tumulus taken in summer, and it gives you a very good idea of its solitary location. The darker part is an approximation of the location of the five-sided pyramid itself. And the trees along the back of the western side have been planted in a straight line over the top of the tumulus. To the southwest of the pyramid, down to the southwest, there is a corner. But if you look up just very slightly, there is what might be described as a buttress. Now, we found that this stone that we were looking at corresponded with that point. And this is where Tony Coulson was very valuable indeed. He felt that the stone was marking the entrance to this five-sided pyramid. In other words, if we're right that it's not natural, then there's every reason, perhaps if we use as an analogy the Great Pyramid in Egypt, that it's not a solid structure and that there would be an entrance to it. And he felt that this was an entrance to a very, very large structure. He didn't know that we thought that the five-sided pyramid was involved here, and he felt that he was picking out the entrance to this structure. Now remember, it's intact on that side. That's the intact part of the five-sided pyramid. Now this is a drawing of the area. As you can see, to the bottom of the picture is the five-sided pyramid. The face is up to the right, and to the northwest is the city, the drawing of the city. And please note the structures that make up what we believe to be the city centre. There are four structures together, and you can see clearly its relationship to the five-sided pyramid. Now the vertical line, the north-south line on Mars, tied in exactly with that line of trees at Avebury. So for some reason, some uncanny reason, the farmer had planted trees in a straight line that corresponds with north-south on Mars. Next we're going to look at the area of the city. The main road climbs to what is a topographical analogue of the city area. Now the city area is, just to remind you, is to the northwest of that picture there. And there's a lay-by, as we say in England. It's a place where you can park your car, very conveniently positioned, so that you can walk along the top ridge of this natural structure. It's the back ridge, in fact, of the city area. If you like, it's the highest part of the city, the average positioning of the apex of all those pyramids along the back of the city. And then looking down from the air, you can see what appears to be a giant amphitheatre. It looks almost as if it had been sculpted by intelligence from the terrain in the dim and distant past, of course. The hills correspond exactly with the pyramids of the city, and the field in the centre corresponds with the city centre. A World War II gun emplacement is positioned on the analogue of a Cydonia pyramid that lines up directly through the city centre and the five-sided pyramid. And the city centre is marked as well. Near the northern edge of the field, two elongated areas of crop have not been planted, or to put it another way, the farmer has sacrificed part of his field, which one must assume is perfectly arable, and not planted crop in those areas. Those two lozenge-shaped areas you can see, they're on the exact spot of the two structures that make up the northern half of the city centre. And then to the rear of all this, we've got buttressing. Now, when we were talking about buttressing, and Tony Coulson was helping us to define what this entrance to the pyramid was like, he drew us such an illustration. And then when we actually saw these buttresses afterwards, we were amazed, because we feel that these buttresses, if you like, represent what these structures would have been like on Mars. But the uncanny thing is that it's like a Hollywood film set. The front part is to be seen, and as we all know, the back part of a Western set, for example, it's got trusses and supports, and if you like, they're almost showing that this is artificial. It's quite incredible and very, very impressive. And just by this site is the famous white horse there, of course. Now, we've just been looking at a 14-to-1 scale reduction of the complex. Remember, 14 miles on Mars was equal to 1 mile at Avebury. We're now going to consider a possible 1.5 times enlargement of the complex. We found that this appears to be represented by the spiral mound becoming Stonehenge. And the northern point of Avebury Circle is the base of the wall. The apex of the five-sided pyramid is Glastonbury. And of course, the well-known Michael and Mary resolving line, you know, that fabulous energy line that goes from Michael's Mount right through to the Wash, goes right through Glastonbury to Avebury along this line, along our hypotenuse. And it connects, and it's our link between Glastonbury and Avebury. Now, this is a picture of Stonehenge. We can't go into great detail about this. This is the subject of something that we should talk about in the future. But we did a survey in 1991, and we deployed 4 satellites to ascertain the exact latitude and longitude of Stonehenge. This had to be calculated in order that we could do this work accurately. Now, the crater on this 1.5 times scale is enormous. It's over 4 miles in diameter and is inferred by Marlborough Downs, a bowl-like valley, and a track called the Ridgeway runs around the western part of this bowl shape. And the road from Avebury runs right along the top of the wall. So if you look at the marking on the map there of Avebury, you can see the top ridge of the wall is indicated by a road that leads to Swindon, and then halfway up the wall, the road to Swindon turns sharp right and then proceeds north along the boundary of the wall. So it's highlighting both the ridge of the wall and the side of the wall at the same time. And Barbury Castle is not far away. It's on the rim of the crater, and that's where, of course, the famous Crockcliffe was formed. Now, the five-sided pyramid, DNM pyramid, the five-sided pyramid, now coincides with Glastonbury, as we've said. The Tor, the Glastonbury Tor, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Glastonbury Tor, it's the most magnificent, it's almost a sculpted mound in itself. It's absolutely fantastic. And if you're not sure what it looks like, it's like a larger version of the side view of the tetrahedral pyramid we saw earlier. Now, the Tor is the analogue of the five-sided pyramid, the apex of it. And the famous well is on the extension of the line from Stonehenge. So Stonehenge is to the right of the picture, and the extension of that line goes through the Tor. It takes us through the well. But we could never understand, after studying this very closely, why Glastonbury Abbey, which of course is also steeped in history, is not on this line. So we had to think further. Now, we went back to the underlying design of the five-sided pyramid on Mars and found that it actually memorializes both five-sided and six-sided geometry. Living things, as we know them, are five-sided. And non-living things, crystalline structures, crystals or snowflakes, if you like, they are six-sided. So we felt that if the five-sided pyramid contains both five and six symmetry, then if we bring them together, we might be able to find some underlying design. And we found that if we joined up the lines that we had connected between the five and the six symmetry, it explained why Glastonbury Abbey is located where it is. You remember the damage that we wanted to point out to you earlier. And the left-hand part of the picture has the non-damaged area, and the right-hand part is damaged. Now, we feel that whatever is left in that part of the pyramid is what is being represented at Glastonbury. In other words, it's a way of us being able to see, a form of remote viewing or memorializing. And we feel that the five-sided pyramid, when it was damaged, only had this part remaining of the technology that we think was in the five-sided pyramid. Now, this technology enabled the people to power the complex on which they lived for a period of time. And the Abbey, therefore, must be an important part of the engineering and the energy generation of that complex. Now, returning once again to Avebury. This is the St. James's Church at Avebury, and we're going to take a look at it because inside it appears to be built out of line. The ancient font under the western spire and the aisle don't line up with each other, but they do if you stand to the tangent of the font. It seems that somehow or another at Avebury they're trying to memorialize the importance of tangents. It's interesting to note that the four roads at Avebury all form tangents to the most significant features of the landscape. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Mars or whether you're looking at Avebury. The roads in the Avebury area run to the tangent of the crater, to the top right of the picture, to the tangent of Silbury Hill, the A4, and to the tangent of the five-sided pyramid, and to the tangent of the city area. And interestingly, the roads are straight in 3 out of the 4 cases, but if you know this area, the road climbs to go up to the analogue of the city, and this road is not straight on the map. And also, would you believe, these roads cross to the tangent of the roundabout, the Beckhampton roundabout. Very, very wonderful. In fact, we found subsequently that every single stone at Avebury is an analogue of something on Mars. That's the reason for them. The Adam and Eve stone, for example, has its equivalent on Mars in exactly the same point. It's quite fabulous. We maintain that the sheer numbers of Crockcliffes are clearly highlighting the immense importance of this area. And yes, the representations are in code, and yes, there is a key. The encoded data and information is beyond our wildest dreams. We've made great progress in decoding this data and information and the technologies in these Crockcliffes. We can only conclude that there is a very strong and very real connection between the two planets, and that there has therefore been physical and or mental communication between Earth and Mars. we believe that the information is not just the message of a special complex on Mars, it's the encoded message of the underlying workings of the universe. Now, allow me to give you a mathematical connection here. It involves something called topology, which is explained in 2/3. And I'm not going to bore you with lots and lots of maths, but maths are always very important. Scientists like maths because it helps to focus the mind and prove things. This is an ongoing project by a wonderful gentleman in America by the name of Carl Munk. And he's found that the figure that you can see from the map here, taken by taking the longitude and the latitude of Avebury, and you find the center point of Avebury, when you decimalize those two, you end up with a figure which is equivalent exactly to the megalithic yard. And we find that the megalithic yard is also an astronomical constant. And I think we're going to learn more about this in the future. As you can see from the calculation, it gives us actually the moon's perigee, its nearest point. Now there's topology on Mars as well. This is the face on Mars, and 6.890283706 is its longitude on Mars. But it means that the face is positioned by intelligence. And merging the double tetrahedron with pi, we get a figure which divides down to 41 degrees, 11 minutes, 10.030 seconds. The location of the face on Mars and the topology positioning of it uses the same technique as we find is brought forth by looking at the central positions of Avebury or Stonehenge or the Great Pyramid or Teotihuacan. This method of topology matrixing, it's like a hyperdimensional matrix. It's not a physical joining of lines together. It all makes sense if you do it mathematically. The face on Mars is most certainly not randomly placed, as NASA would have us believe. Now, the original NASA images from the Viking orbiter sent to Earth in 1976 indicated that the face was symmetrical. It was assumed by those that studied these photographs that the side of the face in shadow was similar to the sunlit side. However, we can now show that the face is indeed a sphinx. After examining recent computer-enhanced pictures employing local contrast equalization, this was also done by Mark Colotto. And as a result of this, the shadow side has been brought up to match the sunlit side. Now, if we look closely at this two-sided sculpture, the right-hand side, that's to say, the right side when looking out into space, imagining that you're the face and you're looking out into space, it's the right-hand side, we can clearly see the primate half. It could represent, and we believe it represents, the emerging being on planet Earth. Self-aware beings, we feel, have consciousnesses. They have souls. Their consciousness, we believe, is located, if it's located anywhere, is located to the tangent of the center line of the body in the right-hand side of the head. Just to the tangent. It's virtually in the center. And if this is right, it would explain why they have put the hominid side on the right and the lion side on the left. This is the left side matched, the side of the sculpture that represents the lion half. There is a very specific reason why the lion is on the left-hand side, because the lion has traditionally represented the heart which is a 3D pumping, the 3D maintenance of our life physically. So you have a representation of the soul of the being, the self-aware being, and a representation of the reality of the being, the physical and the hyperdimensional brought together in a sculpture, half man, half lion. This is explained in great detail, of course, in our book. It's a fabulous concept, and I think someone went to great lengths to think out this design, whether it was for their benefit and ours, or only for their benefit when it was sculpted. It makes no difference. It's a fabulous sculpture. And the best example, of course, we have of such a sculpture on Earth is the Sphinx. It was originally called the Ark-Hur by those who sculpted it. We maintain this was sculpted 237,000 years ago. Readers of 2/3 will understand the reason for this, but the point is it's part man, part lion, and it is also located near pyramids. So we have a Sphinx and pyramids on Mars, and a Sphinx and pyramids on the Giza Plateau.
Mission Director.
Mission Directors, go.
And liftoff of the Titan III rocket with the Mars Observer and America's return to the Red Planet.
Now in September 1992, NASA launched an imaging space probe to Mars that had the capability, beginning in December of '93, of re-imaging the complex under discussion. And despite the strong evidence supporting the intelligence hypothesis repeatedly and expertly presented to NASA, NASA refused to make any effort whatsoever to re-image the complex in question. According to NASA, images of that area would be made available approximately 6 months after they were taken, if by chance the camera had photographed them. However, just as the craft was entering into orbit around Mars on the 21st of August 1993, the 21st of August 1993, Mars Observer failed. It appears that if NASA was not going to make the images available to people of planet Earth, then NASA wasn't going to have those pictures either. Who is responsible for the failure of Mars Observer? Guess where you can read about it. Since the publication of Two-Thirds on the 21st of August 1993, NASA appear to have come to their senses. If you look at the World Wide Web, you'll find there's a big splash on the NASA page. It's the face on Mars. Remember, NASA went to Mars to look for life. What could be more wonderful than finding signs of intelligent life? Isn't this something you would want to shout from the rooftops and saying, we can't understand it, this is absolutely amazing, let's look into it, we don't know what to answer you guys, but let's see what this is. This looks like a sculpture, let's look into it. And there's more. Dr. Carl Sagan recently admitted that the trick of lighting argument used by NASA was an unfortunate misstatement by that project official. And we have had, of course, as we'll all know, that very recent announcement by the head of NASA that they think that there was life on Mars. Having examined apparent fossil remains of primitive organisms they found in a piece of meteorite in Antarctica. But at this stage we're not very impressed, and it's still uncorroborated evidence. But what a U-turn! Something clearly is now going on. It would appear that a decision has been made at very high level to introduce ideas that life might exist elsewhere, especially on Mars. So now to conclude, it already seems established beyond reasonable doubt that Mars was once inhabited by self-aware beings. But even more amazingly, it is also now absolutely clear that the people on Earth knew about it some 5,000 years ago, or probably even much earlier. The second discovery, of course, reinforces the first, or rather, taken together, the two form a totally unshakable case. Thank you. Now let's expand on a few points and cover one or two interesting new ones. In September 1996, there was an announcement from Finland that a group of scientists had built a small piece of equipment that manifests an effect that apparently defies gravity. They're calling it an anti-gravity device. Interestingly, it's a very simplified version of our spinning disk concept. In our view, in order for a spinning disk to release bits and pieces of gravity, gravitrons as we call them, the disk has to have considerable mass and spin at tens of thousands of revs per minute. This experimental device in Finland comprised a rapidly spinning ring of superconducting ceramic material that was suspended in a magnetic field and enclosed in a low-temperature container. This ring was then spun at approximately 5,000 revs per minute. Even though it was only a ring, and it was only spinning at a slow speed, it did reduce by 4.5 ounces a 14-pound weight suspended over the device, a reduction in weight of approximately 2%. Because our spinning disk is fabricated with steel radially embedded into the disk, and electromagnets are used for levitation, supercooling of the base ring of magnets isn't necessary. Our disk is then spun at very high speeds. These experiments at Tampere University of Technology in Finland are certainly a sign of progress in the right direction, and clearly demonstrate the fantastic potential of spinning disks. We feel that such disks will be the power source for both aircraft and spacecraft of the future. Now to a lighter point. Many people have asked why the roads inside Avebury Circle are laid out the way we find them today. Why are they not just simple crossroads? Well, for the answer to this, we have to turn again to the Barbary Castle crockglyph. We can see that part of its design is a tetrahedron. But by taking note of the deviations in the side of the tetrahedron, we can see that it indicates the construction of a complexified three-space tetrahedron, or a five-cell as it is also known. That is to say, while it is drawn two-dimensionally, it shows us, three-dimensional beings, the way a tetrahedron would look when viewed from beyond 3 dimensions, beyond length, width and breadth. This is a demonstration of the potential of the designs inherent in crockglyphs. If we can verify known geometric concepts, can we not also rely on the wealth of additional data and information that these crockglyphs appear to contain? Here is Avebury Circle, and this is how the Barbary Castle glyph sits inside Avebury. This overlay of the Barbary Castle glyph not only dictates the gaps in the earthen ramparts, but the very layout of the roads at Avebury as well. The overlay aligns with the road leading to the southeast, the road leading to the north, and the road through the village to the west. Consequently, it explains the strange lateral displacement of the north-south roads, here in the centre of the village. So in our view, Avebury, through its road layout, is a memorialisation of that which lies beyond 3 dimensions. Avebury, of course, leads us back to Mars. Earlier, we looked briefly at Olympus Mons, the energy upwelling on Mars, located at 19.47 degrees north. It is the largest mountain in our solar system. To the southeast of that vast volcano are 3 smaller volcanoes, and these 3 volcanoes link to the Giza Plateau in Egypt. Robert Bouval and Adrian Gilbert have demonstrated a strong connection between the 3 stars of Orion's belt and the 3 pyramids at Giza. But their superimposition has to be achieved by inverting the north-south alignment of the pyramids. In the case of these Martian volcanoes, the 3 pyramids at Giza also make a very good fit indeed, but without having to invert them. There is more. When we overlay these 2 sites, we see that the Great Sphinx lies exactly to the tangent of the Martian equator. So now we have yet another connection between Mars and Earth. On both planets, we have pyramids adjacent to a sphinx. Now we have 3 natural features of the Martian landscape matching these manufactured structures on the Giza Plateau. And, to capstone it all, the Arabic word al-Kahir, Cairo, means Mars. You may have been wondering what this spiral is doing over the illustration. Well, it's part of the Fibonacci, or transdimensional spiral, that dictates the layout of the entire Giza complex. The complex is not based on a layout of straight lines, but on arcs and curves. Look how the spiral describes the apexes of the 3 pyramids. It's beautiful. Most particularly, it explains why the Great Sphinx is located exactly where it is. And an additional link. You see the 5-sided image here? It's actually the ground plan of the DNM, the 5-sided pyramid on Mars. Now this leads us to the most exciting of all connections with the Giza Plateau. the Cydonia complex is apparently represented on a very small scale here on Earth. So far, we've been looking at the small scale and the large scale models. Now, here is the very small scale model. We found that the Cydonia complex is represented inside the Great Pyramid. This is the usual view of the passages and chambers of the Great Pyramid. Here is the entrance, the ascending gallery, the Grand Gallery, and a picture of the passageway to the Queen's Chamber. The Queen's Chamber is here, the King's Chamber antechamber, and the King's Chamber itself. And this is the unusual view, the hidden view, with superimposed Martian complex and the Avebury map. We can see straight away that the Cydonia crater is squared by the King's Chamber floor, ceiling and walls. Look at this incredible match here with the ceiling lintel of the northernmost point of Avebury Circle. The boundary of the Avebury paddock dictates the height of the Grand Gallery. The five-sided pyramid sits precisely at the lower end of the Grand Gallery. The route of the Roman road from the site of the five-sided pyramid to Silbury Hill requires a step down in the passageway to the Queen's Chamber, and this is precisely what we have at this point. The slope angle of Silbury Hill is 30 degrees, and the slope of the Queen's Chamber roof is also 30 degrees. And the straight section of this alleged air shaft from the Queen's Chamber is located at the tangent of Silbury Hill, or the Spiral Mound. The church at Avebury tangents the granite slab that comprises the roof of the King's Chamber antechamber. The tetrahedral rim pyramid is located at the top right-hand corner of the King's Chamber. The wall sits midway between the top of the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber. Isn't it fabulous? There are, as you can see, many correspondences. The Great Pyramid is a limestone structure both outside and inside. However, the King's Chamber and the King's Chamber antechamber are constructed of granite. We believe the granite is intended to represent that which is beyond 3 dimensions. Remember that Avebury Circle and its road layout represents, in our view, that which lies beyond 3D. And as we have shown, Avebury Circle is an analogue of the Cydonia crater. So we can conclude that the granite in the Great Pyramid represents hyperdimensionality, or 4 dimensions, that which is beyond length, width and breadth. And one can't miss the fact that there are 4 spaced layers of granite above the King's Chamber. So let's ask ourselves why the Great Pyramid is laid out in a manner that meshes so well with this complex on Mars. We show in our work 2/3 that the Great Pyramid is a model in stone of a hyperdimensional computer. This is the process that always computes virtually instantaneously, or in real time, no matter how complicated the task. Is it not therefore a good idea that we consider that the Cydonia complex is laid out the way it is, because it is a representation of this technology that functions hyperdimensionally? And that we shouldn't be surprised that a model in stone of such a technology on Earth and the layout of the Cydonia complex mesh one with the other so perfectly. It certainly should make us think, at least. The Cydonia complex, therefore, in our view, is a depiction, among other things, of the computer technology that ETs use for their travel throughout the universe. In order to cross galaxies at vast speeds, one needs more than a craft and a suitable power source. Please allow me to expand on the statement made concerning the age of the Great Sphinx. Dr. Robert Schoch, at the instigation of John Anthony West, surveyed the Sphinx in 1991. Following this very extensive geological survey of the Sphinx and the basin out of which it is carved, Dr. Schoch concluded that due to differential weathering and erosional features, it was carved between 7,000 and 9,000 years ago. That's to say the Sphinx is up to 4,500 years older than generally believed. We too have reason to believe that it is at least as old as that. But we feel that in the fullness of time, many will come to realize that it is much, much older. Profiles of the Great Sphinx, photographed by Caroline Davis and analyzed by New York police forensic artist Frank Domingo, clearly demonstrate that it is not the face of the pharaoh Khephren. Additionally, we can now show that it is apparently a combination of two images. Yes, like the face, the Sphinx on Mars, it's also a split. But not vertically, horizontally this time. We found that the Great Sphinx is Neanderthal in its lower part and Cro-Magnon in its upper part. This is a complete Neanderthal skull. Notice the protruding brow and the receding jaw, prime characteristics of Neanderthal. This is a Cro-Magnon skull. Note the eyes and the brows. Neanderthal preceded Cro-Magnon by some 200,000 years. Cro-Magnon man first appeared approximately 34,000 years ago. So allowing a margin of 3,000 years, we have a total of 237,000 years. This is the result of combining the lower section of the Neanderthal skull and the upper section of the Cro-Magnon skull. This shows the superimposition of the new combined skull on the head of the Sphinx. Notice the receding jawline, for example. We consider the fit to be excellent. In our view, it's not possible for any species of human, even 9,000 years ago, to have carved this structure, encoding the two stages of evolution that led from the hominid, Homo erectus, through to modern man. And now, finally, to the probe Mars Global Surveyor. It's scheduled to map Mars and photograph its surface during 1997. It's intended that it will orbit the planet once every 2 hours with a multi-resolution camera and photograph its entire surface. Let's hope we get some good colour snaps of Cydonia. No doubt, one day, people from planet Earth will go to Mars in a craft powered by a spinning disk. We have to go there. It's on Mars, within the complex that we've been discussing, that we will find our inheritance.